Welcome to an intense drama unfolding in the vast cornfields of Iowa, where family loyalty, cultural heritage, and deadly secrets collide in ways that will leave you breathless. Andrew Morrison, a wealthy farmer living what seemed like a peaceful life, thinks he's doing the right thing when he helps Olivia Crow Feather, a young woman of Apache heritage, fleeing from unimaginable danger. But what he doesn't know is that his own cousin has orchestrated a web of deception that will put both their lives at risk and expose a conspiracy that reaches the highest levels of power. Before we dive into Chapter 1, hit that like button. If you're ready for a story full of unexpected twists, heart-pounding action, and the kind of courage that defines real heroes, and don't forget to comment below telling us where you're watching from. Are you joining us from the heartlands of America, the bustling cities of Europe, the vibrant communities of South America, or somewhere else across the globe? We absolutely love connecting with our international audience and hearing your stories. The rescue. The August heat shimmered off Highway 30 like liquid mercury, creating dancing mirages above the asphalt as Andrew Morrison's pristine white pickup truck rumbled through the endless Iowa cornfields. The corn stood 8 feet tall on both sides of the road, a green wall that stretched unbroken to the horizon, rustling softly in the humid breeze that offered no relief from the oppressive temperature. At 34, Andrew had built Morrison Farms into one of the most profitable agricultural operations in Tama County, transforming the 2,800 acres he'd inherited from his grandfather into a modern agricultural empire worth over $12 million. His success hadn't come easily. Years of calculated risks, smart investments in precision farming equipment, and an uncanny ability to predict grain market fluctuations had elevated him from comfortable to genuinely wealthy. But despite his financial success, Andrew had never lost the small-town values his grandmother had instilled in him during those long summer afternoons on her wraparound porch, learning about responsibility, integrity, and helping those in need. That's why, when he spotted the young woman stumbling along the dusty roadside near Marshalltown, her dark hair matted with sweat and her clothes torn and dirty, he immediately pulled over without a second thought. The temperature gauge on his truck's dashboard read 94 degrees, and the humidity made it feel like stepping into a sauna when he opened his door. "Miss, are you all right?" Andrew called out, his voice carrying genuine concern as he stepped from his air-conditioned cab into the oppressive heat. The woman was clearly in distress, favoring her left leg and clutching her right side as if nursing an injury. The woman turned toward him, and Andrew was immediately struck by her striking features: high cheekbones that spoke of Native American heritage, almond-shaped eyes that seemed to hold depths of wisdom and pain, and skin that had been kissed by the prairie sun. She couldn't have been more than 25, but her eyes held the weight of someone who'd seen far too much hardship and betrayal in her young life. "Please," she whispered, her voice hoarse and desperate, barely audible above the gentle rustling of the cornstalks. I need to get away from here. They're coming for me. I can hear them getting closer." Andrew glanced up and down the empty highway, seeing nothing but endless rows of corn swaying gently in the humid breeze, the occasional red-winged blackbird perched on weathered fence posts, and heat waves dancing off the pavement. The silence was broken only by the distant hum of his truck's air conditioning and the soft whisper of wind through grain. "Who's coming? Are you hurt?" he asked, noting the way she kept glancing nervously over her shoulder and the tremor in her hands. "My name is Olivia Crow Feather," she said, gratefully accepting the ice-cold bottle of water he offered from his truck's cooler. Her hands shook so badly she could barely grip the bottle. "I'm from the Meskwaki settlement, about 20 miles from here, but I can't go back there. Not now. Not after what I discovered about people I trusted." The Meskwaki settlement. Andrew knew it well. Iowa's only Native American settlement, a sovereign community where he'd done business with several tribal members over the years, always selling them corn and soybeans at fair prices when other farmers in the area tried to gouge them with inflated rates. He'd always respected their independence and their connection to the land that ran as deep as his own family's agricultural roots. "What did you discover?" Andrew asked. Though something deep in his gut warned him, this was much bigger and more dangerous than a simple family dispute or community disagreement. Olivia's hands continued to shake as she drank the water greedily, as if she hadn't had anything to drink in hours. "There's a casino development deal worth tens of millions of dollars. The developers promised our people jobs, revenue sharing, cultural preservation. All the things we've been struggling to achieve for decades, but it's all built on lies and deception and murder." Her voice dropped to a whisper on that last word. She looked up at him with desperation that cut straight to his heart. "I have proof of everything, documents, recordings, financial records that show the truth. But the people behind this conspiracy, they'll kill me before I can expose them to the authorities. They've already murdered 2 members of our tribal council who started asking too many questions." Andrew felt the familiar tug of his conscience, the same moral compass that had guided him since childhood, when his grandmother would read him stories about heroes who stood up for what was right. His ex-wife Sarah had always said he was too trusting, too quick to help strangers, too willing to get involved in other people's problems. Maybe that's why she'd left him for her yoga instructor in Des Moines 3 years ago, claiming she needed someone more practical and less idealistic. But looking at this young woman's terror, her desperation, and the genuine fear in her eyes, he couldn't just drive away and pretend he'd never seen her. "Look, I've got a spare bedroom at my farmhouse," he said, making the decision that would change his life forever. "You can clean up, get some food, and we'll figure this out together. I've got good security systems, motion sensors, cameras covering every approach to the property. You'll be safe there while we contact the proper authorities and get this sorted out." Olivia's relief was so palpable it was almost painful to witness. Tears began streaming down her dust-streaked cheeks as she whispered, "Thank you. I don't know why you're helping me, a complete stranger, but thank you. Most people would have just driven past." As they climbed into his truck and began driving toward his farm, passing the familiar landmarks that had defined his life, the old grain elevator that had been abandoned since the 1990s, the rusted Sinclair gas station where he'd bought penny candy as a child, the white Methodist church where his grandmother had dragged him every Sunday until he was 18. Andrew couldn't shake the growing feeling that he was stepping into something that would change his quiet, predictable life forever. His cell phone buzzed with an incoming text message. The caller ID showed his cousin Marcus. "Hey, cuz. Heard through the grapevine that you might have some unexpected company coming your way. Be careful who you trust out there. Remember what Grandpa always said, family first, blood is thicker than water. Hope everything's okay." Andrew frowned deeply as he read the message, a cold knot forming in his stomach. How could Marcus possibly know about Olivia? He hadn't told anyone about picking her up, hadn't made any phone calls, hadn't even been home yet. The text felt wrong somehow, too casual for someone genuinely concerned about his safety. He glanced at the young woman beside him, noting how she kept checking the side mirrors obsessively, her body tense as a coiled spring, ready to bolt at the first sign of danger. "Andrew," she said quietly, as they turned onto his private gravel road, flanked by towering cornstalks that rose like green walls on both sides. "There's something else you should know before we get to your house. The people behind this conspiracy, they're not just outsiders trying to exploit our community. Some of them are locals, people who've lived here for generations, people you probably know personally, maybe even trust." The Morrison farmhouse emerged from the corn like something from a Grant Wood painting, pristine white clapboard siding that gleamed in the afternoon sun, a wraparound porch where his grandmother's rocking chair still sat exactly where she'd left it, and the classic red barn in the distance that had been featured in a local tourism brochure. Andrew had inherited the property from his grandfather, along with the 2,800 acres that made him one of the wealthiest and most respected men in the county. But as he helped Olivia from the truck, he noticed something that made his blood run cold, and set every survival instinct screaming. Fresh tire tracks in the dirt beside his mailbox, tracks that were too wide and too deep to belong to any of his farm equipment or delivery vehicles. Someone had been here recently, someone who'd turned around and left in a hurry, leaving deep gouges in the earth. "We need to get inside immediately," he said, his hand instinctively moving to the .38 revolver he kept in the truck's glove compartment, a precaution his grandfather had taught him that had always seemed paranoid and unnecessary until this very moment. Inside the farmhouse, with its familiar smells of coffee, old wood, and his grandmother's lavender sachets, Olivia collapsed onto his grandmother's antique sofa, exhaustion finally overtaking the adrenaline that had kept her moving. Andrew locked the front door, engaged the deadbolt, and activated his sophisticated security system, watching the monitors as cameras scanned the perimeter of his property in slow, methodical sweeps. "Tell me about this casino deal," he said, settling into the worn leather recliner across from her. "Start from the very beginning and don't leave anything out." Olivia closed her eyes, gathering her strength and organizing her thoughts. 6 months ago, a development company called Prairie Wind Enterprises approached our tribal council about building a casino resort on settlement land. They had impressive presentations, architectural drawings, financial projections. Everything looked legitimate and professionally done. She opened her eyes, and Andrew saw fury mixed with fear and betrayal. They promised 800 permanent jobs for our people, revenue sharing that would fund education and healthcare programs, and cultural preservation initiatives that would protect our heritage for future generations. All the things we've been struggling to achieve for decades, while watching our young people leave for opportunities in the cities. "That sounds like it could have been beneficial for your community," Andrew said, though he was beginning to understand this went much deeper than legitimate business development. "It should have been," Olivia said bitterly. "But I work for the tribal administrator's office. I handle contracts, legal documents, financial reviews, all the paperwork that keeps our government running. When I started reviewing the Prairie Wind proposal in detail, I found discrepancies that didn't make sense, money that didn't add up, environmental impact studies that had been falsified, construction timelines that were impossible to meet." Andrew felt ice forming in his veins. "That's fraud and deception, but hardly seems worth killing people over." "It got much worse when I dug deeper," Olivia continued, her voice growing stronger with anger. "I discovered that Prairie Wind Enterprises is nothing but a shell company with no real assets or employees. The real money is coming from a consortium of local businessmen and politicians who plan to use the casino as a front for money laundering operations, illegal gambling networks, and other criminal activities." She reached into her torn jacket and pulled out a small flash drive, holding it like it contained the secrets of the universe. "Bank records, emails, recorded phone conversations, financial transfers, everything is on here. But when I tried to contact the FBI field office in Des Moines, I learned that someone in law enforcement is also involved in the conspiracy. My cousin Jimmy, who works dispatch for the county sheriff's department, warned me that they were planning to arrest me on trumped-up charges, or worse, before I could expose the truth." The security system chimed with an alert that made Andrew's blood freeze. Motion detected on the north side of the property. He checked the monitor and saw a black SUV with tinted windows slowly cruising past his farm, moving far too slowly to be a casual passerby or lost tourist. "They found you," he said grimly, his voice tight with controlled fear. "I'm sorry," Olivia whispered, genuine anguish in her voice. "I've brought this danger to your doorstep. I should leave right now and face whatever happens to me alone." "Absolutely not." Andrew's voice was firm and determined. "Nobody threatens innocent people on my land. We're going to finish this together, but we need help from someone we can trust completely." He picked up his landline to call his lawyer, but discovered the line was completely dead. No dial tone, no static, nothing. His cell phone showed no signal bars, despite normally having excellent coverage on his property. This was professional work. They were being electronically jammed and isolated. That's when he heard the sound that made his blood freeze in his veins, the distant rumble of multiple vehicles approaching through his cornfields. They weren't coming up the main road where they might be seen by passing traffic. They were cutting directly through his crops, destroying thousands of dollars worth of grain to reach his house unseen. Andrew moved quickly to the window and peered through the blinds. 3 black SUVs were threading carefully between the corn rows, their occupants invisible behind heavily tinted windows. These weren't local law enforcement officers or federal agents. These were professionals with serious money and serious connections. "Olivia, we need to move right now," he said urgently. But as they headed for the back door, Andrew's cell phone managed to catch a brief signal and buzzed with another text message from Marcus. "Sorry, cuz. They made me an offer I couldn't refuse. Nothing personal, it's just business. You understand how the world works." The pieces of the puzzle clicked into place with horrible, crystal clarity. Marcus, who worked for the County Planning Commission and had access to every major development proposal in the region. Marcus, who knew every landowner, businessman, and politician in 3 counties. Marcus, who'd grown up dirt poor in a trailer park and had always resented Andrew's inherited wealth and social position. Marcus wasn't warning him about danger. Marcus was part of the conspiracy from the beginning. "The barn," Andrew said grimly, grabbing his shotgun from the gun safe and stuffing his pockets with shells. "There's a tunnel my grandfather built during Prohibition to move illegal whiskey. It leads to the creek bottom, about a quarter-mile through the corn." As they slipped out the back door, Andrew could hear engines growing closer and the static of radio communications. Professional, organized, deadly efficient. These weren't amateur criminals trying to make a quick score. They were dealing with people who had serious money, serious connections, and absolutely no qualms about murder. The barn smelled of hay, motor oil, and decades of honest farm work, familiar scents that now seemed tinged with danger and desperation. Andrew led Olivia to the far stall, where a hidden trapdoor opened onto wooden steps leading down into musty darkness. "Stay close to me and don't make any noise," he whispered, clicking on a powerful flashlight. "And Olivia, when we get through this alive, we're going to make sure everyone involved in this conspiracy pays for what they've done." Behind them, the sound of splintering wood and shouted commands indicated their pursuers had reached the farmhouse and were conducting a systematic search. They had maybe 5 minutes before the search expanded to the outbuildings. As they descended into the tunnel that his grandfather had carved out of Iowa earth nearly a century ago, Andrew realized his quiet, comfortable life as a successful farmer was over forever. But maybe, just maybe, he could help Olivia expose the truth and bring these criminals to justice before it got them both killed. The tunnel stretched ahead into darkness, much like their chances of survival. Family, betrayal. The tunnel reeked of damp earth, rotting timber, and the accumulated moisture of decades. Andrew's powerful LED flashlight beam cut through the thick darkness as he and Olivia moved as quietly as possible through the narrow passage, their footsteps muffled by the soft dirt floor that still showed evidence of his grandfather's bootlegging operation from the 1920s. Behind them, the muffled sounds of voices and heavy boots on wooden floors indicated their pursuers had reached the barn and were conducting a thorough, professional search. Andrew estimated they had been underground for nearly 20 minutes, moving carefully to avoid loose boards and unstable supports. "How much further?" Olivia whispered, her voice barely audible over the sound of their careful footsteps on the packed earth floor. "About 200 more yards," Andrew replied quietly, trying to keep the anxiety and fear out of his voice. His grandfather had built this tunnel in 1923, during the height of Prohibition, to move illegal whiskey from the farm to a hidden dock on Timber Creek, where boats could transport the liquor to Chicago speakeasies. Andrew had played in this tunnel as a child during family gatherings, never imagining he'd someday use it to flee for his life from professional killers. They emerged from the tunnel into a grove of massive cottonwood trees along the creek bank, their leaves rustling softly in the humid Iowa evening. The oppressive heat wrapped around them like a wet blanket, and the familiar sound of cicadas provided natural cover for their movement through the tall prairie grass that grew wild along the water's edge. Andrew checked his phone. Still no signal, but the digital clock showed it was after 8 p.m. They'd been underground for nearly an hour, and darkness was beginning to settle over the Iowa countryside like a protective blanket. "We need transportation, and we need it fast," he said, scanning the area for options while listening for sounds of pursuit. "My neighbor, Jake Schultz, has a farm about a mile downstream. He keeps an old Ford pickup by his equipment shed for running errands, keys usually tucked under the visor." As they moved carefully through the tall grass along the creek, staying low and moving from tree to tree for cover, Olivia suddenly grabbed Andrew's arm with an urgent grip. "Wait just a minute," she said, her voice tight with a new realization. "You said your cousin Marcus texted you warnings. How could he possibly know I was with you? You hadn't told anyone, hadn't made any calls. How did he know?" Andrew's stomach dropped as the implications hit him like a physical blow. In the adrenaline rush of their escape, he hadn't fully processed the timing and the impossibility of Marcus's knowledge. "Marcus works for the County Planning Commission," he said slowly, pieces falling into place. "He has access to traffic camera networks, property records, maybe even cell tower data if he's working with the right people and has the right connections. Which means he's been tracking us from the moment you stopped to help me," Olivia said grimly, her voice filled with bitter understanding. "This isn't just about the casino development or even the conspiracy. They're using you to get to me, but they also need you silenced now that you've seen me and heard what I know about their operation." The truth hit Andrew like a sledgehammer to the chest. He'd thought he was rescuing someone in distress, performing a simple act of human kindness, but he'd actually walked straight into an elaborate trap that had been set using his own family connections and his predictable good nature. Marcus hadn't just betrayed their family bond and childhood friendship. He'd orchestrated Andrew's involvement from the very beginning, knowing exactly how his cousin would react to finding someone in need. They reached the Schultz property as full darkness settled over the Iowa countryside like a heavy curtain. Jake's farmhouse sat dark and empty. He'd mentioned at the grain elevator last week that he was taking his family to the state fair in Des Moines for the entire week, an annual tradition that went back to his own childhood. The old Ford F-150 sat exactly where Andrew remembered, its rust spots and dents telling the story of decades of hard farm work and Midwest weather. The truck had seen better days, but it was reliable transportation that wouldn't be immediately connected to either of them. "Keys are here," Andrew said, finding them clipped to the sun visor, exactly where farmers had been hiding spare keys for generations. The engine started with a reluctant rumble and a cloud of blue smoke, but it ran smoothly once it warmed up. They pulled onto the gravel road, with headlights off until they were well away from the property, driving by moonlight and instinct through countryside Andrew had known since childhood. "We need allies," Olivia said, as they drove through the darkness, cornfields creating walls on both sides of the narrow road. "People we can trust absolutely, people who can't be bought or intimidated." Andrew thought carefully about his options. His circle of truly close friends was small. Most of his relationships were business-related or casual social connections that wouldn't hold up under this kind of pressure. But there was one person who'd never let him down, someone who'd proven her integrity and courage over decades of dedicated service. "Helen Kowalski," he said with growing confidence. "She was my high school English teacher, retired now, but still sharp as a tack and tougher than most men I know. She lives in Iowa City, about 40 miles south of here. More importantly, her son David is an FBI agent based in Chicago, with experience in organized crime investigations. Can we trust her completely?" Olivia asked, and Andrew understood her caution after being betrayed by people she'd trusted. "Helen once drove me to the hospital when my dad had his heart attack during harvest season, stayed with me all night in the waiting room when my mom couldn't get there from her business trip in Minneapolis." Andrew said, memories flooding back. She's also the only person who ever stood up to the school board when they tried to whitewash the section about Native American history in our state history textbooks. She spent her own money to buy supplementary materials and taught the real history despite threats from parents and administrators. As they drove south on Highway 6, through rolling hills and sleeping small towns, Andrew's mind raced with the implications of what they were facing. The scope of this conspiracy was becoming clear. The scope of this conspiracy was becoming much larger than he'd initially imagined. A multi-million-dollar criminal enterprise that threatened not just Olivia's tribal community, but the integrity of law enforcement and government throughout rural Iowa. Olivia, these recorded phone conversations you mentioned, do you know who the main players are beyond your local contacts? She nodded, her face illuminated by the dashboard lights as they drove through the darkness. The head of Prairie Wind Enterprises is a man named Vincent Castellanos. According to the financial records I found, he's got extensive connections in Las Vegas and Chicago. Old organized crime families trying to legitimize their operations through Native American gaming laws and rural development projects. Andrew felt his blood chill. Organized crime in Iowa had seemed like something from a movie, but he was beginning to understand this wasn't just local corruption. It was something much bigger and more dangerous, using rural Iowa as a front for national criminal operations that could reach anywhere. As they approached the outskirts of Iowa City, Andrew's phone finally caught a strong signal and immediately buzzed with a flood of missed calls and text messages. Most were from Marcus, but there were others, numbers he didn't recognize, messages that made his blood run cold with their casual threats. They found Helen Kowalski's house on a quiet street near the University of Iowa campus, a modest two-story home with a meticulously maintained garden that reflected her lifelong attention to detail. Despite the late hour, lights were on in the living room, and Andrew felt the first surge of genuine hope since this nightmare began. Helen opened the door without any apparent surprise. "Andrew Morrison," she said calmly. "I was wondering when you'd show up. Come in, both of you. I'll put coffee on." In Helen's book-filled living room, surrounded by the familiar scents of old paper and coffee, they explained everything. Helen listened without interruption, her sharp blue eyes taking in every detail. "David called me 2 hours ago," she said when they finished. "The FBI has been monitoring chatter about a major operation in eastern Iowa. When your name came up in connection with Olivia Crowfeather, he put the pieces together." Andrew's phone rang. Marcus's number. Helen gestured for him to answer and put it on speaker. "Andrew, thank God." Marcus's voice was strained. "You're in way over your head. These people have already killed 2 people and won't hesitate to kill more. Just bring the girl in. Turn over the evidence. You can walk away clean. And if I don't, then you're both dead by morning. And Andrew, they know about the teacher's house. You've got maybe an hour." The evidence. The storm sewers beneath Iowa City were a concrete maze that reeked of stagnant water and decades of urban runoff. After navigating by Andrew's dim phone light for over an hour, they emerged behind a Hy-Vee grocery store into pre-dawn darkness. At a 24-hour McDonald's, the fluorescent lights and familiar smells of coffee felt like a return to normal civilization. They settled into a corner booth with clear sight lines to all entrances. "We need to review everything you have," Andrew said urgently. Olivia pulled out the flash drive that had started this deadly chase. Using her tablet with the restaurant's Wi-Fi, they began examining the evidence that could bring down a criminal empire. Financial records showed Prairie Wind was indeed a shell company, but the money trails led to a network of legitimate businesses across the Midwest. Construction companies, political consultants, casino management firms, all connected through shared ownership and carefully disguised financial transfers. Every month, money flows from casinos in Nevada and Mississippi into accounts controlled by Castellanos, Olivia explained, pointing to the screen. Then it gets distributed to local partners here in Iowa. $15 million in 18 months. The recorded conversations were even more damning. Sheriff Deputy Tom Reynolds discussing how to handle tribal members who ask questions. County Commissioner Patricia Wells coordinating cover-ups. People Andrew had known for years, casually discussing murder as if planning a church potluck. Andrew's phone buzzed with an unknown number. "Mr. Morrison, Special Agent David Kowalski, FBI. My mother says you need assistance." "David, where are you?" 2 miles away. What, Ms.? Crowfeather has collected could be the breakthrough we need to bring down a network we've been tracking for 3 years. Within minutes, they were in a federal vehicle heading toward what they hoped was safety. But another call from Helen changed everything. They found the safe house. Castellanos has people in federal law enforcement too. "Now what?" Olivia asked as they changed direction again. "Now we go public," Andrew decided. Justice-served KCRG TV9 news station in Cedar Rapids became their sanctuary. Rebecca Chen, an investigative reporter, immediately understood the magnitude of their story and set up cameras for what would become the broadcast that changed everything. Over the next hour, they laid out the entire conspiracy. Financial records, recorded conversations, systematic corruption reaching from tribal lands to the State House. Rebecca's sharp questions helped clarify how this wasn't just about one casino, but establishing Iowa as a criminal hub for money laundering and trafficking operations throughout the Midwest. By 8 a.m., national news crews were en route, and the story was breaking across social media platforms. But Vincent Castellanos made one final, desperate play. Andrew's phone rang. "Marcus, supposedly in FBI custody. They've got my kids, Andrew. Sarah and the twins. They want a trade at the old grain elevator on Highway 30. 1 hour or they die." The confrontation at the abandoned grain elevator was broadcast live to millions. Castellanos, surrounded by armed men and holding hostages, made the mistake of confessing his crimes on camera, thinking he could still control the situation. "I'm bringing economic development to rural Iowa," he said arrogantly. "Jobs, tax revenue, investment capital, built on murder and fraud," Andrew replied. When Olivia revealed that everything was being broadcast live, Castellanos' expression shifted from confidence to rage. FBI tactical units were already surrounding the location. The standoff ended quickly but violently. When one of Castellanos' men threatened the hostages, Andrew didn't hesitate. He rushed forward to protect Marcus's children as FBI agents opened fire. In 30 seconds, it was over. Castellanos was wounded but alive, his organization exposed and destroyed. 6 weeks later, Andrew testified in federal court as Vincent Castellanos, and 17 co-conspirators were convicted on charges ranging from racketeering to conspiracy to commit murder. Olivia returned to the Meskwaki settlement to work on legitimate economic development. Andrew's farm was rebuilt, stronger than before. Marcus served his sentence, but his family survived, and Andrew kept his promise to help them start over. Rebecca Chen won a Peabody Award for her reporting that exposed corruption networks in 3 states. 3 months later, Olivia visited Andrew's rebuilt farmhouse on a crisp October evening. They sat on his porch, watching the sunset over golden cornfields, drinking coffee and discussing the future. "Do you ever regret getting involved?" she asked. Andrew considered the question seriously. His quiet life was gone forever, but he'd helped expose a conspiracy that threatened communities across Iowa. He'd discovered courage he didn't know he possessed. "No regrets," he said. "But I could use a partner who won't betray me to organized crime figures." Olivia smiled, the first completely relaxed smile he'd seen from her. "Andrew Morrison, are you asking me to go into business with you? I'm asking you to consider that good people are stronger when they work together." As stars appeared over the Iowa prairie, Andrew realized his life hadn't been destroyed, it had been transformed. The criminal conspiracy had ultimately brought them together and shown them both what they were capable of when they chose courage over comfort. In the distance, a truck rumbled down Highway 30, the same road where their story began. But now it represented hope instead of fear, possibility instead of danger. That's the incredible story of how one act of kindness exposed a criminal conspiracy, reaching Iowa's highest levels of power. Andrew's courage and Olivia's determination proved that ordinary people can make extraordinary differences when they stand up for what's right. If this story inspired you, smash that like button and subscribe for more intense real-life dramas. Comment below and tell us where you're watching from around the world. Have you ever had to choose between safety and doing what's right? Hit the notification bell for more stories of courage, justice, and triumph.